I mean, we had the Chinese trying to hack into the clocks and timers at the Olympic venues. How do you run track and field if you can't run a clock? Folks would go into the Navy recruiting station, take the test, and if they got a score that was off the charts, I'd get a call. 18 months later, that Walgreens employee is working for me, doing some of the hardest nation-state hacking activities the U.S. government has ever conducted. I would argue to bank CIOs, of course the North Koreans are coming after you. Of course the Iranians are coming after you. Watch out. You're on the target list, whether you know it or not.
The year you started your NSA career was?
2002.
2002. So talk to me, if you would. We're here in New York. The shadow of 9/11 must have laid extraordinarily heavily over the organization at that point. How was it influencing the atmosphere, the focus, the motivations of individuals who were joining? Give us a sense of that, if you would.
Well, it's exactly right. So you could imagine, this is an organization that takes the safety and security of Americans and our allies as, that's their calling. That's existential for them. And to enter the organization in the year after 9/11. So first, the waves of young people joining the NSA at that time. My enter on duty class, as we would call it, 300 people from all across the United States coming together with one singular focus, which was to prevent another 9/11 from ever happening again and to successfully seek retribution for all of those lives that were lost. An electric environment to be part of, to be in part of an organization where they had failure to connect the dots, all of the lessons learned coming out of 9/11, and you're hiring a new crop of technologists across the country to do something that there was no doubt in our minds that we were going to make history in those jobs. And I am lifelong friends with hundreds of people where we all came in together, having watched the Twin Towers fall, having watched what happened at the Pentagon, just knowing that if we could be a part of making sure that never happened again, we could feel good about that.
And I suppose when you have non-state actors, you also have a suddenly emergent digital infrastructure that allows them to combine, unite, plan, orchestrate in ways that would have been completely inconceivable.
Yes. The bringing
together,
the bringing together, like the kind of organization that only nation states could have achieved, the proliferation of the internet, and then certainly, you fast forward through history, social media, what have you, exactly your point. The ability for organizations that didn't exist to now organize, in the truest sense of the word, organize around a common goal, a common value system. For the first time, that was possible. And 9/11 showed us what that could look like in terms of a manifestation of physical violence. But yes, the environment at the NSA in the years immediately post 9/11, very long hours, very high stress levels, somber mood a lot of the time. These were people who, they wore this as a personal failure.
Right.
And we had a new generation coming in at that time that didn't incur that failure on our own sleeves, but saw the quality of the people we were working with, and we were hell-bent on doing whatever we needed to do to prevent that from ever happening again.
And what was your remit as an individual contributor when you joined? How did your career in the NSA begin? What were you focused on for the first few years?
Well, I absolutely loved every day of it. And I spent the first 3 years, as many NSAers do, actually rotating between different offices. So they want you to expose to, what does counterterrorism look like? What does counterproliferation look like? What does a nation state threat look like? What is drug smuggling in 2002? All of these things, they want you to get that broad-based understanding. But as a technologist, here's the difference between the NSA and the private sector. In my day job at Morgan Stanley, I and my CIOs can make conscientious, intentional, deliberate decisions about what technologies we use. We can choose this or that. This cloud provider, not that one. This software library, not this one. We can make vendor choices, we can make infrastructure choices, and we then build a workforce that is expert in the platforms that we've decided to use. We're going to build an architecture, we're going to build a tech stack, and we're going to resource that tech stack to an end state. The NSA does not have the luxury of making its own technology choices. Instead, it is driven solely by the technology choices that terrorists thousands of miles away have made. So I may decide, just by example, that I'm an iPhone user. The terrorists can make any decision they want. The NSA then has to become an expert in whatever technology that terrorist, that proliferator, that foreign government has chosen. And in some parts of the world, those are really interesting technology choices. So an example, obviously, very strong focus on North Korea. Well, North Korea, because of all the international sanctions and ITAR restrictions, the only versions of Windows you find in North Korea are these crazy, cracked, way off-brand versions of Windows. No one else in the world has to care. But if you are at the NSA and you're worried about North Korea, you are suddenly becoming an expert in cracked versions of Windows that you're having diplomatically pouched in because they're not for sale. That kind of technology work, indigenous Iranian firewalls. Again, not being able to make your own technology choices and having to pivot on a dime, because as soon as you become an expert and you've solved the problem, which of course from a terrorist perspective is usually a kinetic solution, well, what have you done? You've now forced the terrorists to pivot to a new technology. So what I saw at the NSA is a whole group of technologists that are becoming experts in things that will never be used in the United States and are having to become really, really good at pivoting on a dime to something that they've never heard of, but they know has got to be their next launch of expertise.
It sounds like the atmosphere must have almost been like a huge university.
Yes.
Everybody studying discrete systems. I mean, and with what is the overriding remit to be able to effectively penetrate any technological infrastructure that could conceivably be used anywhere in the world? I mean, it's a huge undertaking.
Absolutely.
Right?
So, if you think about the NSA remit holistically, really two big job jars there. One is to protect all of the U.S. government's critical infrastructure. So you think the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, all of those embassies overseas, the NSA has to protect all of those communications, which means having a deep understanding of adversary capabilities. There's a lot of cat and mouse in that game. But where I spent my career at the NSA was all on the offensive side. So where do we see the biggest risks, the biggest threats? What technology are they using and how do we get in? Maybe it's we're able to listen on the wire. Maybe this is a true offensive operation where we're getting into the network. The goal of living there undetected, unattributed for a decade, just siphoning off secrets and putting them on the president's desk. The NSA has thousands of people who wake up every single morning laser focused on doing exactly that. Whatever the most important target technology is of the day, you may have never seen that protocol before in your life. It is now your singular reason for being.
Soul of the CIO is sponsored by Nexthink. Now, if you work in IT, you'll know too well how disruptions can derail productivity fast. Nexthink's AI-powered platform for digital employee experience keeps you ahead. It uncovers issues others can't see and resolves them automatically with employee-centric AI and always-on automation. Employees stay productive, IT stays proactive and even preventative, and leadership sees results. Nexthink, ahead of every IT disruption, behind every strategy. Learn more at nexthink.com.
I'm sure there's so much you can't share, but it would be fascinating to get some kind of an insight as concrete as possible into what you were able to prevent, into the types of incidents that the organization or you yourself were able to influence for the positive, to kind of put some flesh on that achievement.
Well, in thinking about this, knowing we were going to talk about this today, I would tell you that I could list probably on two hands now. So, fewer than 10 instances where operations or activities that I was involved in, I go to sleep every night knowing that we changed the course of history, that we saved lives, that we prevented wars. And when you get a bunch of NSAers together, like obviously there's no group of people on the planet who are more committed to protecting America's secrets and the secrets of our allies. But you get that group together, and sort of in a cover term-laden lexicon, you end up with a lot of reminiscing about things that were truly phenomenal.
Without a doubt. And I wonder if you ever, I'm sure you do, reflect philosophically on this, because failures of the sort of 9/11 define entire eras, define generations. And they define them because they become manifest, they're scarring, and yet the fact that successes are all compressed under the radar, that they're completely invisible, and they don't have the chance as such to define anything. It's rather sad when you reflect on it, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, and I used to tell my workforce at the NSA this all the time. Like, you are never going to get kudos in the international media. In fact, if you're ever in the international media, it means that something went terribly wrong.
I might
right?
get to that.
So, and those things did happen, but like being able to be introspective and recognize that even though you're never going to get credit, say on the world stage, that you know what you did. I mean, I have a couple of awards that I was fortunate to win as a result of good work at the NSA, where the award is literally a word. There's nothing else in writing that will ever be connected.
It's on a piece of wood or something.
It's on a piece of wood, yes, sort of a well-engraved piece of wood with a word on it.
It's a code, effectively.
Which means a tremendous amount to me, and very intentionally means nothing to anyone else. Just have to be satisfied with that.
You have to find a coded way of talking to those grandchildren one day,
Someday.
Yeah, there'll be a way of communicating it, perhaps.
But my heart is still there. And I mean, obviously, I have loved these last, 9 years at Morgan Stanley. But, I mean, my heart is still at Fort Meade, Maryland. I'm fully intending to go back. I got to get my kids through college first. But once we've sort of crossed that bridge, I have some unfinished business there, some important things that I still want to get done.
And you've already kind of alluded to it. You needed to put some kids through college and such like, but you made the transition to Morgan Stanley. Tell me about that movement, first of all.
Well, it was not anything I had ever expected. So, I told you I was a lifer, and I'm still going back, right? Like, I mean, I left the NSA after 15 years. I'm 5 years away from that pension. I got to go back and collect that at some stage. Sure. But really, because there's still, as I said, a lot of work to be done. After 15 years, so I had a couple of different jobs there. I mean, obviously, the NSA, they move you around. They want you to get exposure to lots of things. So I spent a couple of years running the counterterrorism operations mission there, which, as a technologist, is amazing, right? Because you become laser focused on an individual. You want to know everything about them, their patterns, their technology choices, certainly. But you felt like you got to know these people better than anyone else knew them, right? Because you read every email, you listened to every phone call, you knew where they were 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So infiltrating their device to read their emails, listen to their phone calls, geolocate them, maybe pass that geolocation on to some entities that had some other powers at their disposal. It was an amazing job. Between us, took a couple years off my life, I'm sure. For any ladies who are listening to us today, this is when I started coloring my hair because I was more stressed than I had ever been. Being in a position where on a day-to-day basis, a success or failure, you're talking about lives on the line. And not just American lives, but obviously we were working on a global scale to try to prevent the spread of al-Qaeda. Then you move into ISIS, all of the things in that era. I loved that job, but it is not for the faint of heart. And the folks who work counterterrorism for 20 years, I honestly don't know how they do it because it is it's just fraught and it's emotionally wrenching on a day-to-day basis. So I did that for a few years. Then I spent 3 years in London doing cybersecurity for the Olympics. So you will remember that when you all hosted the Olympics in 2012, the Chinese had just hosted a very successful Olympic Games in Beijing.
Oh, you think so?
Well, I mean, they all went well on TV. It looked good. So, but it was very interesting in the UK in 2012 because this was the first Western Olympic Games with really a cyber component. So obviously the Olympics, as an incredibly high-profile event, had always been a target of terrorists. You can go back, to the beginning. It's always been a target of terrorists.
We were just discussing the film Munich before you came in, ironically.
All right, well, there you go. Yeah. So certainly a hotbed of potential activity, but London in 2012 is the first time we're really worried about cyber threats. So we took kind of a divide and conquer approach with the Brits. Obviously, given their history, they're very well versed in terrorist plotting. They had the terrorism threat to those Olympic Games well in hand. So for the Americans on site, we really took on that cyber threat. So this meant building a whole security operations center in the basement of the American embassy. We brought over 60 NSA hackers to staff that SOC for 6 months, instrumented all of the Olympic venues, telemetry, all the things that like our modern CIOs and CISOs would think of that you would do if you were trying to secure a corporation.
Yeah.
We did all of that for the Olympics, and it was a 3-year effort across all forms of government. Very stressful, but I will tell you, I watched those games go off without a hitch. And you think about things maybe that I'm most proud of looking back at. I mean, we had the Chinese trying to hack into the clocks and timers at the Olympic venues. How do you run track and field if you can't run a clock?
Just to make the Olympics go badly.
Rub some grit in the eyes of the British. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, dear.
And, of course, you had the Russians who were trying to hack into the databases that housed the Olympic drug testing records. Makes sense now, right? But you think about that era, they knew the doping scandals were going to break. They were trying to manipulate the records in advance.
Wow.
Now, we're sitting there going, this seems like really weird, and we're trying to defend against it. But it just goes to show that with cyber attacks, you don't necessarily know the end state when you're watching the attack play out. We didn't know what was going on there, but just all kinds of miscreants looking to cause problems.
An international cooperation of that sort this year, this decade, has something of a bad name, doesn't it? And this is an illustration of true collaboration and presumably lots of money spent by both countries in trying to ensure this.
Well, and not just the U.S. and the U.K.
Principle.
Every country that is sending athletes to the Olympic Games is very invested in their safety and security. And so I felt like we were really wearing the world's mantle leading into those games of what are we going to do to protect the thousands of athletes that have descended upon the United Kingdom and all of the dignitaries. And from a cybersecurity perspective, it's hard to imagine something more gargantuan in terms of scale of need to protect.
And as a kind of microcosm of a major corporation, did it alert you to the potential for that transition, or did the transition, as it were, come to you?
Oh, I had no idea at that time. I was just having a great time trying to.
Sure.
It was wild times. I mean, London in that era. Keep in mind, this is pre-Brexit, so there's. I think London's an incredibly wonderful, vibrant city now, but in that era. You every time you turn the corner, you heard a language you'd never heard before. And so I loved every aspect of that. Did that, then got lured back to suburban Maryland where the NSA is headquartered, to what I would share with you really was my dream job. So the job that I had wanted from the day that I started at the NSA, that's the job they offered me. I was on the first plane. So this was running the NSA's cyber exploitation operations mission. Right. So if you think about that offense, defense, the pointiest point of the spear that the NSA can bring to bear is these professional hackers that are armed with hundreds of millions of dollars of nation-state hacking capabilities that are the best that the United States can breed out of American universities. Those folks join this organization that runs professional hacking missions against the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans. They're the best of the best at what they do, and the opportunity to lead that workforce, I would have come back from any corner of the world to do that job. And of course, the leadership knew that I was very interested in doing that. Crazy job. So imagine this as we had to, of course, find people who could do the work. Well, you work with lots of technologists trying to find a brand new computer scientist, computer engineer coming out of UC Berkeley who is willing to forego that 6-figure offer at Amazon, Microsoft, Google to come work for government peanuts instead. Now, of course, the U.S. government has relationships with universities across the U.S., many of which go back to even before the Manhattan Project. These are long-standing relationships. And every once in a while, we'd get a call from the head of the computer science department at University X saying, Rachel, I think I've got a guy, and I'll be honest, almost exclusively a guy, who I think would be perfect for you. So we would find these strange dudes. What was my pitch trying to hire people to come be an NSA hacker? Frankly, it was that I could offer them the opportunity to do something that would be illegal anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting pitch. If you don't want to be beholden to the Computer Fraud and Abuses Act, I'm your girl. Come work for me. So we'd find these kids,
Sure.
most of whom were, again, kind of strange. We'd bring them to
Like Dexter.
Maybe not that kind of strange, but I take your point.
Similar dynamic.
But but I would tell you, yes. I mean, I definitely, people on the autism spectrum do really, really well in that kind of environment. We'd bring them in. We'd give them 18 months of highly classified training. Our pass rate was only about 50%.
Okay.
So it is about as hard to become an NSA hacker as it is to become a fighter pilot if you're already in the U.S. Air Force Academy. So this is the cream on top of the cream of the crop. These folks who, and I have to tell you, half the workforce is these young kids coming out of college with a new computer engineering degree that really want to take on the world. The other half, folks enlist in the military in the United States. I don't know how this works in Britain. You'll have to tell me. If you enlist in the military in the United States, the very first thing you do is take a test called the U.S. Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the ASVAB. The ASVAB is basically an intelligence test, and the government here uses it to decide which roles, which skills you could do. So if you go in and you get a 10, maybe you're going to be a cook, maybe you're going to be a truck driver. All really important things, but they don't require this great cerebral brain talent maybe to get involved in. When folks would go into the Navy recruiting station and take the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, and if they got a score that was off the charts, I'd get a call.
Wow.
Rachel, we got someone coming to you. Many of these kids, 18 years old, did not have a day of college to their name.
Mm.
I don't care.
Yeah.
If you are, the son of a couple of dirt farmers in Mississippi, if you grew up in a pocket of the United States where college was not in your future, but you've got that kind of intellectual horsepower, you're my guy.
Yeah.
So we'd have kids show up. Again, they have no formal computer science training.
And this is probably the only way of, the nearest you have to nationwide IQ straining,
Yes.
right? It's just everyone who takes this test.
And the thing is, the Israelis do this par for the course.
Right.
When you do your 2 years of service in Israel, you've taken this test. And so they're putting their population through the sieve much more intentionally. The North Koreans, you turn 11 in North Korea, you take an intelligence test.
Very interesting. Yeah.
If you score best and brightest on that North Korean intelligence exam, you are immediately on-ramped into their bank hacking program.
This is so logical.
Yes.
Every country needs to do this. Come on.
Well, there's also free will, not to
Well,
be,
you don't have to then, you don't then force somebody into
No.
it.
Well,
give
in
them the
North Korea
opportunity.
you do, right?
Okay,
In
no,
North
of
Korea
course.
you take out the free
We don't
will
take the
element.
North Korean approach, but
No. But understanding, I mean this is, and I get really emotional about this, the fact that we found young men and women, 18, 19 years old, that their life circumstances were never going to be conducive to college, never going to be conducive to, that Ivy League path. But we find them because they don't want to, I mean, it's a real example. A kid who was working at a Walgreens in Tempe, Arizona, decides on Thanksgiving weekend that he, really wants to see the world. So he enlists in the Navy, takes the test. 18 months later, that Walgreens employee is working for me, doing some of the hardest nation-state hacking activities the U.S. government has ever conducted.
That's so interesting. And must be a bit like being told you have a superpower.
Yes.
The government comes out of the ether, tells you you're special. We
Yes.
need you to do this special secret mission. I mean, it's the stuff of movies, isn't it?
Well, and we couldn't tell them anything about what we had in mind for them. They go off to basic training just like everybody else, and they're jumping over fences and crawling through ditches,
Oh, really? Okay.
having no idea that
They've been singled out.
that they have been singled out and that they are on a path to become a professional hacker.
I'm interested to know, I mean, you're describing a very rare personality type by definition, and in some sense, morally complex personality types. On a leadership level, in terms of managing people, what was what was the good guiding ethos for how you approach this very complex workforce? Any illustrations or anecdotes you could share that point to this element of leadership?
So I loved it, but I will tell you, it's not for everyone. So to your point, I used to characterize this environment as, imagine having a fraternity on a submarine. That's kind of what we got here. So you've got a lot of weird people from very different walks of life. Everything from, newly minted computer science PhD out of Georgia Tech, now sitting next to a 19-year-old kid from Pascagoula who has never been to college, but now they're doing the same job. Mm-hmm. So the kind of the cultural relativism of this workforce coming together was an interesting thing. And also just people who needed to be managed, thinking about CIOs, like people who need to be managed in a way that is quite different. So biggest challenges that I had as, what I loved to be referred to as the queen of the hackers at the NSA.
Cool.
Biggest management challenge, I kid you not, was hygiene.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So, it's one of these things where I actually had shower caddies in my office. Folks would come in the morning. We'd give them a little bit of the sniff test, see if they were ready for human cohabitation at that moment. And in some cases, the answer was no, and we'd send them down to the showers. So lots of conversations about, these guys wanted to work all the time. I had problems with people sleeping at work. I had problems with people sleeping in their cars because they couldn't be bothered to go home. They just wanted to get back on keyboard. They just wanted to do more work. And this led to some real compromises in basic hygiene. So these were the kind of life skills that, I got to teach these young men. And again, it was a man problem with the hygiene. The other big problem, so I am not a gamer. But I will tell you, video game addiction
is real.
Particularly
when
is rampant. So think about it this way. If you have an employee who is routinely late to work, that's a problem. But if you're late to work at the NSA, I have to send the police to your house. I have to work with the assumption that you're on a plane to Moscow, i.e. Edward Snowden. So if you're 2 hours late to work at the NSA, it is an all points bulletin saying we got to find you, because if we can't find you, we might have a real problem.
They have to be scraped away from their PlayStations.
And this would be the issue. So again, I don't play these games, but I will never forget the week that Halo, and I don't even remember which version of, have you ever played this game?
I'm not a gamer myself,
okay.
But I've seen Halo.
You've seen
it's
this.
a guy on a planet shooting aliens and people.
If you say so.
Yeah, if you say so. Yeah.
The day that Halo came out, I had a workforce crisis. The entire workforce wanted to take the same week off. They all had the game on pre-order.
Wow.
The game arrives. All of a sudden, I come to work. There's no one there. And not because they slept through their alarm, but because, we had to reschedule whole swaths of mission-critical operations because of Halo. I hope it's that good a game. I have no idea.
Do you not think they saw their work as like the ultimate IRL computer game as well? Do you think they'd get enough out of that?
Well, it's never quite enough.
Never quite enough.
And so
real stakes.
We would have a lot of issues with. We actually had a psychologist on staff. We would host PlayStation interventions, Xbox confiscations. I was getting girlfriends and sisters and mothers involved.
Finding them girlfriends.
Well, like, you need to get up in the morning. Like, you need to come to work on time, because if you don't, we got a real problem.
Incredible. And at Morgan Stanley, did you have to have the showers and the PlayStation things, or was it a different environment?
It's a good point.
Was that the last
Yes.
job at the NSA?
So that's what I did for 5 years. I loved it. I mean, I'm sure that like my scratches of my nails when they pulled me away are still in the carpeting. Best job you could imagine. So, and I would say that in part because as a technologist, again, you got to work pretty much every technology on the planet. So just very satisfying to bring together world-class technologists and doing something that you really can't do anywhere else. Also very satisfying as a leader, because, I mean, I would put it this way. We used to bring back what we used to call eye-watering intelligence. So information that when you thought about the fact that you were going to put it on the president's desk the next morning, like brought a little tear to your eye. And those moments where, you know, you think you could get someone, the Secretary of State, the talking points for the meeting they hadn't even had yet. Like, that is so badass. And it is so cool when you can do that. Very, very satisfying intellectually and from a leadership perspective. And after 5 years, and you'll appreciate this, I mean, government, you can't stay in the same job forever. They would come to me every year and say, Rachel, what do you want to do next? And I would say, leave me right here, queen of the hackers forever, lifetime appointment, I'm good, nothing else I want to do. And after 5 years, they're like, you got to go do something else. And it was around the same time that Morgan Stanley called me. And I would tell you that any point before that in 15 years, I wouldn't have picked up the phone because, well, obviously at the NSA you don't have your phone. But even if I had my phone, I wouldn't have picked it up. But in that moment where I knew I was going to have to make a transition, then it becomes a moment of, well, how much of a transition do I want to make? So I was fortunate, like many of us. I had my boss of many, many years at the NSA had retired after a 32-year incredible, illustrious career. And had been hired at Morgan Stanley as the head of cybersecurity for the whole firm. So he called me when he'd been there about a year and said, you know, if you don't want to do this next thing for the NSA, and I'm not saying it's forever, what would you think about moving to New York with your family, working in financial services at a bank as the head of cybersecurity for Morgan Stanley's wealth management division? I kind of threw up. Then like put myself back together, because honestly, I mean, I had never worked in the private sector, and I had never had any intent of working in the private sector. I mean, I didn't know what a bank did. I didn't know what a wealth management firm was, and I had never met a financial advisor because I had no money. So all of a sudden I'm in this position of, do I want to really take a risk? Do I want to actually do the thing that scares me most? Jump off a cliff, try that whole new job? Not least of which in my mind was the fact that I was going to be moving a highly opinionated 13-year-old daughter with me to New York. For anyone listening who has teenage kids at home, coming home and telling them, oh, I just quit my government job and you're going to have to drop out of school and move to Manhattan and figure out what that's all about. Got about 6 months of I hate you, Mom.
It's not the worst proposition I've
Well,
ever heard in my life, to be honest.
I was redeemed in the end, to exactly your point, in that after about 6 months of living in Manhattan, my teenagers realized that actually being a teenager in Manhattan is a really sweet deal.
Not bad.
Not bad, that they had a lot of freedom, autonomy that maybe they wouldn't have had in the Maryland suburbs. But yes, I came to New York for 2 days of interviews, having no idea what to expect. And decided to give it a go. Figured, you know, worst case, I don't like it, and I will go back, as I still intend to my NSA family that's doing great things. But if I'm going to do this, like, now's probably the one chance.
Since we were discussing the rather distinct cultural challenges of being a queen of the hackers, let's talk about that transition culturally, violent transition. In a good sense, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I know how much you loved your previous role, but I mean, it must be different planets.
Oh, I had no idea what I was doing. So a couple things I figured out real quick. One, you know, I think going to a bank, I had expected ruthless efficiency. And instead, what I discovered, and now I've learned that this is with good reason, you work in the federal government, you work in the Defense Department, and you think you have cornered the market on bureaucracy. Who could be more bureaucratic than the Defense Department? Then you come to a large, heavily regulated bank, and you find out that bureaucracy is alive and well across Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies. I mean, the nature of bureaucracy, right, is to prevent an individual or a small group of people from taking undue risk. Certainly, the government is very invested in preventing undue risk, but big banks, big financial services firms, tech firms, pharmaceutical companies, they all are invested in preventing the ability of a small group from going, way off in the wrong direction. And so now I have a strong appreciation for why bureaucracy, as much as it might be painful on a day-to-day basis, is actually really important for organizations that are very appropriately and correctly risk-averse. But I was very surprised that while my queen of the hacker skills might have been useful from a technology perspective, it was actually bureaucracy hacking that turned out to be my secret sauce in this job. So I show up at Morgan Stanley. They have no idea what to do with me. They're all very interested in hearing NSA stories, but I'm like, okay, I'm here as your head of cybersecurity. What are you worried about? They didn't really know, and I didn't really know either. So the first 6 months were flipping a lot of rocks, asking a lot of questions. I'm a big believer in learning in public. I think that as we become more senior in our careers, we got to become more comfortable learning in public, not less. And so coming in as a new person that knew nothing, I viewed that as an opportunity to just play the new girl card for as long as possible. And I spent a good 6 months on a listening campaign where all I was doing was meeting with every senior person I could find saying, what do you do? What are you worried about? Have you thought about cybersecurity? Is it even is it in your sleepless night job jar at all? And what I discovered really quickly was that applying what I had learned at the NSA, practitioner-level hacking skills, understanding how an adversary would really look at your environment, your network, your applications, your systems, that a lot of the things that big institutions worry about, that they think are their top cyber risks, are actually not the kind of things that if you were a big nation-state intelligence gathering apparatus would keep you up, would be your primary driver. So for example, when I came to Morgan Stanley, everyone I talked to was really, really worried about the Morgan Stanley mobile app. What I conveyed to them really quickly was that actually the Morgan Stanley mobile app, modern dev environment built in the structured confines of what iOS and Android require, modern, actively maintained code with all the bells and whistles that we would expect of that. That was actually the least of my concerns. The Morgan Stanley mobile app was probably our safest app just because we had just built it. Show me that green screen mainframe application that no one has touched that code in 30 years because all those people died, right? Like, that's the app that's gonna bite us, right? It's the tech debt. It's the end of life components we've got in our environment. It's that application that nobody's touched in 30 years that was written in an environment where no one was thinking about cybersecurity. Those are the apps, the architecture components, the system components that worried me much, much more than all of the stuff we had built in the last year. I can see and touch that code. I can see and touch those people. That COBOL, though, holy cow. Who's doing that work now?
When I looked at the two stages of your career, I thought that there's a feasible degree of crossover, right? I mean, there's no reason a malign state actor wouldn't like access to Morgan Stanley's digital infrastructure any less than the US is or the London Olympics or something, right? I mean, how much of a continuation was there between worrying about terrorists who would be looking for extraordinary funding opportunities, worrying about nation-state actors from the one context to the other? How much consistency was there?
Well, you have just asked a massive question. Okay. So let me unpack this in a couple different directions, because there's the view that I had 9 years ago when I started, and then frankly my view on now what that has changed. So you're totally right that I would say, circa 2016, 2017, there were a couple things going on in the environment that especially banks had to be very attuned to. Now, the first was the whole situation with Iran. So if you think about the decade prior to that with Iran, now Iran, they have long recognized that cyber represents an asymmetric threat. So if you think about it this way, since we're sitting in New York, if you wanted to sail an aircraft carrier into New York Harbor and you're Iran, that's a decade-long billion-dollar project. Like the barrier to entry for that, for being a blue water navy, that's really high. Likewise, thank God, building a nuclear weapon has proven to be very difficult. So what did the Iranians learn from the 10 years prior? It was that you can retaliate for things like cyber attacks, physical kinetic attacks, international sanctions with cyber means, and you can do so cheaply and quickly. So how did this manifest for banks in that era? Well, between 2012 and 2014, you had the Iranians literally putting 40 guys in the basement of a building in Tehran, wreaking havoc on Wall Street. 46 banks in 2.5 years, bank to bank to bank, wildly disruptive denial of service attacks, all in retaliation for things that had nothing to do with those banks, international sanctions. And so when the Iranians were dealing with sanctions against the Central Bank of Iran, the Iranian oil industry, they were putting money and resources towards their cyber arsenal, recognizing that any of these targets are potentially great retaliatory strikes. And so the banks had become very attuned to, wait a minute, like Iran is coming after us? We didn't ever see ourselves in that light. The other thing that, of course, changed, watershed moment for cybersecurity at banks was the Bank of Bangladesh heist. So if you go back to this in 2016, this is where you have the North Koreans, their most notorious, preeminent hacking group, the Lazarus Group, for which there are some excellent podcasts that we should all be listening to that tell us that story. But where you had the North Koreans, who, keep in mind here, are funding their government by hacking into banks. That is their national strategy. That, in essence, makes sense if you have no domestic economy, because you're North Korea, and you have no international trade because you have massive sanctions against you. How do you make money? You make money by hacking banks. Never expected to see bank hacking as the source of anyone's gross domestic product, but that is essentially the North Korean strategy, and it has been for a while. So the banks in North America, so this is true in the U.S., this was also true all across Canary Wharf, they watched what happened to the Bank of Bangladesh, where essentially the North Koreans get in, they manage to change some wire instructions, they manipulate the SWIFT gateways, and in a matter of 3 days, they siphon off $100 million out of Bangladesh with no one noticing. Now, eventually people noticed, some of that money was recovered, but what I think not everyone appreciates about just what a watershed moment the Bank of Bangladesh hack was, is that when you actually unpeel it, there are two things that no one appreciates. One is that the North Koreans were a typographical error away, like literally a spelling mistake away from that being $1 billion loss, which in that time period, that was 1/8 the reserves of the entire nation of Bangladesh. This close to gone in a long weekend? How could something like that happen? Then you have organizations like the United Nations taking notice, to the point where 2 years later, they published a report supporting the allegations of 27 countries around the world, all of whom were asserting that the North Koreans were coming after their financial services industry. So now all of a sudden, if you think you're in the crosshairs, not of just Iran, because they're going to retaliate, but because you're going to be the source of the funding for the next North Korean missile, the next nuclear weapon, that was a wake-up call on Wall Street that, holy cow, we've got to take this seriously because we've got multiple nation states that are coming after us, not because we've got the nuclear command codes, but because we've got access to a lot of money, and because we are what the U.S. government calls a globally significant financial, entity. And so having that kind of ability to move markets, having the ability to, so much personally identifiable information of wealthy individuals around the world, of course we're a target. And to see that monetized in that era in such really, tactical, tangible terms, boardrooms across Wall Street were clamoring to better understand what was going on.
And what do these insanely escalated stakes mean for modern CIOs? I mean, particularly within banking, but not exclusively, right?
So it means that we have to view ourselves as the kinds of targets that we used to think of as only being defense contractors. I mean, you knew if you were building nuclear weapons, your source code was a target. I would argue to bank CIOs around the country today, of course the North Koreans are coming after you. Of course the Iranians are coming after you. And now with these last 3 years, Russia, Ukraine, the Russians are so interesting with this because very different approach. They do not want a full slap in the face, colonial pipeline style attack. They don't need our money. They're not looking for retaliation in this space. But they certainly are looking to cause some pain for U.S. industries. They have a very potent cyber arsenal. And so if you are a CIO of a company that does business with Ukraine, watch out. You're on the target list, whether you know it or not. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is that sort of threat landscape really changed the game for CIOs in that time period. But what I would tell you, if we can skip ahead a little bit, is that now these boardrooms are apoplectic over a whole different aspect of cyber risk. So if we went back in time 5 years ago and I'm presenting to our board, it's the conversation we just had.
Yeah.
Like, these nation states are coming after you for various reasons. Now we talk about those things, but the conversation is dominated now by the role of what we would call cyber criminal syndicates. So if 5 years ago I told our board that the vast majority of the malicious cyber traffic that was thrown against our perimeter every day was nation states, now what I told them as recently as last week was that 70% of the malicious cyber traffic we see against our perimeter today is criminally motivated and is financial in nature. So these are not nation states. These are criminals that are, and we can talk about the tools they're using here, but they are looking to make money. And the difference is the dollar figures they're after can be much smaller, right? They're not building a nuclear weapon. They're trying to feed a family in Ghana. So you have a different risk profile there, both in terms of the risk they're willing to take and the money that they consider a significant and robust return. But the scale of cyber criminal activity today, even for someone with 25 years in this space, boggles my mind. So here's the metric I would give you. If you put every cyber criminal in the world in one country today, that country would have the third largest gross domestic product on the planet. It would be the third largest economy in the world, 11 trillion in cyber criminal revenue last year.
Wow.
So think of like the traditional organized crime rings that we've had in the world for, time immemorial. Now those traditional organized crime rings, and I am told there are in fact the 5 families of cybercrime, they are operating at scale and they are frankly very, very successful. I think it's hard to say that the good guys are winning when you look at the outcomes for last year.
Oh, interesting. And how does it's the inevitable question, but how does the entrance of AI into this overall picture, I would almost say like the democratization of cybercrime might be a way of thinking about it?
So I
right?
love that.
Yeah.
So I think it's 2 things. We've certainly seen, with the proliferation of artificial intelligence combined with the unfortunate democratization of lots of very advanced cyber capabilities, so things that would previously have been the domain of nation states, we're now seeing in the public domain. So potent cyber capabilities combined with AI, I would put it this way. It's been a lowering of the barrier to entry to being a quite sophisticated cyber actor. So you think about my like smelly boys from back at the NSA days. What did you need to be a hacker 10 years ago? Well, you needed an advanced degree in computer science, or you needed to be a savant from the dirt farms of Mississippi. You needed to be identified as someone special in this space. You needed this advanced degree. You needed 18 months of highly classified training. You needed access to a nation-state toolkit. You needed covert infrastructure. This was not an individual sport 10 years ago. Now what do you need? Kids today who want to be professional hackers, a little bit of ChatGPT, watch some YouTube videos the same way our kids learn how to do anything, and then they're off to the races as quite sophisticated cyber actors. So it's that lowering of the barrier to entry, but it's also, I would put it as a scalability increase. So an ability to increase the scope and scale and velocity of cyber attacks to a level that I wouldn't have been able to imagine, 5 years ago. So can I give you an example of one of these like AI-enabled cyber attacks that we see? This is one where the attack itself is as old as time, but AI has proved to be this catalyst, making the attack way more potent than I first saw it years ago. So this is sort of your classic credential validation attack. Every CIO has experienced these and is experiencing them today, whether they know it or not. This is where a hacker goes out to the dark web and buys 10 million credential pairs, so logins and passwords. So every company that gets breached, where the hacker goes after all the logins and passwords, dumps them for sale on the dark web, all of these new hackers will buy that list of 10 million credential pairs from AT&T, knowing that people are lazy and weak, and that we all use the same password again and again and again. And so maybe the password you were using for your mobile is the same one you're using for your bank account. So the hacker is going to take those 10 million logins and passwords and is going to try to throw them against my authentication gateway just to see what sticks, right? Are any of my clients using the same password in multiple places? Now, 10 years ago, you could run that attack, but you would be fat fingering in those logins and passwords into my front door, my authentication gateway for the rest of your life. Now what do? ChatGPT gens up that Python script for you, runs through all of those compromised logins and passwords, autofills my, password field again and again and again, and plays cat and mouse with me on the back end. So how would we have detected one of these attacks in the past? Well, even with a script, I would have said, human beings don't type that fast. This is a bot. This isn't real. Well, so what does AI do? Slows down that pace of typing to look exactly like what I would expect a normal American in Peoria, what their typing speed to look like. So every control I put in place, the fact that you've got AI leveraging the attacks against me, everything I do, every remediation, every control, every dodge, every pivot is a data point for the AI on the other side saying, oh, I've learned something about my defenses, about my approach, and I'm going to get a little bit better tomorrow in how I go about this. Now, to increase the scale, they are leveraging botnets that are now available for rent on the dark web. So obviously nation states have been using botnets, think highly hackable endpoint devices, Internet of Things type devices all over the world. If I can generate a script that harvests the computing power of 10,000 smart TVs, now all of a sudden I have a distributed covert infrastructure all over the world in the form of smart televisions to help me launch this attack. One of the recent attacks we saw, we were under attack by a herd of smart refrigerators, 10,000 refrigerators throwing 10 million credential pairs against my front door. Now, again, the botnet, it's not terribly smart. All it returns to the hacker is a thumbs up, thumbs down. This login and password does or does not work for a customer of this bank. But it's what happens next, right? If we get that thumbs up, the hacker is going to try to log into those accounts, set up bill payments, money movements, all the kinds of things you would have seen a traditional fraudster do 10 years ago. But now with AI, all of that is happening lightning speed, completely scaled and automated. the volume and the velocity, really, really intense.
Listening to you talk about your career, and one thing that really strikes me is it's so much about human beings, right? Like you're looking for the exceptional person, you're looking for the person with good motivations, with good ethical standards. There's so much about the individual in what you've done, despite it being a heavily technical career. Does technology suddenly sweep the person away, sweep the human beings away in this dynamic? What is your view? Because it has implications for all of us in some way, no?
So I would argue 3 things will occur here. 1, those savant types will be more important than ever because we will have automated away all of the rote tasks. So, I think about this even in my current cybersecurity structure, right? Like you think about your level 1 analyst, your level 2 analyst. If I can leverage technology and AI and machine learning to make me better at those rote functions, all of those jobs go away. We're not going to be hiring level 1 analysts a year from now. Many firms are not even hiring them today because if I can defend 99% of the cyber attacks that I experience on my perimeter every day through means that are entirely automated, where no human being has to touch them, those jobs go away. But those savants that can kind of see where the puck is going rather than where it's been, they will continue to be crucial. Now, that said, my other view in all of this is that we in the cybersecurity community have been overly myopic in thinking that that guy is the only guy we need. Because you think about it this way, I mean, in the United States today, like 600,000 open cybersecurity roles. I view this as a national crisis, right? We cannot fill the jobs that we have in the cybersecurity space today. And when I talk to small, local, regional banks about their cybersecurity team, it's a non-existent thing. I mean, I look at it and say the Fortune 50 companies right now who have all hired former NSA hackers to be their CISOs. And what's my team at Morgan Stanley? It's the 50 smartest guys and gals that worked for me at the NSA. They shower now. They're moved.
I bet they're very well groomed at this point.
They're very well groomed. You got to come visit me on my floor. It's
redolent of expensive aftershave.
Beautiful. Some of them still can't really do pants.
Sure.
So we do have a special dispensation on my floor at Morgan Stanley where people can wear whatever they want.
Cargo shorts
You want to wear shorts, flip-flops, and a hoodie every day? As long as you smell good, you're going to be fine. So you can't take that out of these folks. And in fact, I'm a big believer as a leader and as a we have to embrace that what makes these guys really good is also what makes them really weird. And that's just a good, happy combination of things that we need. But my point in this is that we've really focused on, your kind of classical hacker in the hoodie with the flip-flops who's weird and, doesn't understand social interactions. And, I've got some guys at Morgan Stanley, they cannot handle being alone. So they're always with other people. We have other people who can't handle with being with people. So we've given them spaces where they can be by themselves. Mm-hmm. I want to accommodate all of that. But what I've come to appreciate is that we actually need a much broader swath, a much wider aperture of skills in the cybersecurity space if we're going to be successful. I mean, I would never have imagined that I couldn't do my job without a lawyer. But holy cow, in today's regulatory environment and with the geopolitical environment being what it is, my lawyer on my cyber team is as important as any single one of those technologies because I don't want to go to jail and I don't want our clients to get in trouble. So thinking about people going into cybersecurity law, not a thing we were talking about 10 years ago. I need those people. The folks that are best at identity and access management, the folks that are really good at cloud configuration controls, those are very different people than your classical hacker sitting in the basement in the hoodie. And so I've made it a real quest over the last decade to say, let's think in a more inclusive way about the folks that can bring to bear skills against this problem. And so, yes, I think we're always going to need those classical, super weird hackers, but this is one that's really going to take a village. And the people on my team that don't even necessarily have technical skills, but wow, they can They can negotiate a contract in a way that really ups my cybersecurity game. Those that are really good at communicating with my clients. I mean, at the end of the day, my biggest problem at Morgan Stanley today is not all these hackers globally. It's my clients that are, older and are trying to navigate in a world that was not the one they grew up in. And I'm trying to convince them that they all want to be digital natives and that they want to do their banking and investing online and that they should be willing to authorize a wire on their phone. I'm only going to reap the benefits of all the cybersecurity and data protection investment that I've made if people leverage the capabilities. And so when I have clients writing personal checks in 2025, if our clients never wrote another personal check, I could send half of my fraud department home. Mm-hmm. Because what happens, it's a squeeze the balloon problem, right? What happens when I shore up the front door from a cybersecurity perspective? You drive the fraudsters to more antiquated, low-tech forms of fraud. So it's check fraud, it's debit card fraud, it's credit card fraud. I want our clients embracing the technology we've built because that will make them safer. All too often, they see the world around them and they think the answer is off the grid, aluminum foil hat in a cave. They're not going to be on the internet. What I need them to understand is that actually creates far more risk than when they're doing their investing, their activities online, when they're using online banking capabilities, that all of that is actually much safer than the paper check they're putting into the black box that is the U.S. Postal Service, that'll be the highest risk thing they do all day. But the hacker from the NSA wearing the flip-flops is not the person you want explaining to your grandmother why paper checks are bad. So I've had to hire people who are excellent communicators. They're all in the soft skill business because persuading grandma that actually she wants to log in and send that wire online, anathema to her thinking process.
A development in IT more broadly,
Yes.
Towards the soft skills, towards the communicative. Absolute pleasure to have you join us today. Absolutely riveting and delightful conversation. Thank you so much, Rachel. I have a last question for you, though.
Sure.
And I thought of it while we were talking, right? So the cultural element of running a team of hackers or indeed the same savants at Morgan Stanley, they kind of relate, I think, to what a CIO has to keep in view with regards to individual employee needs, right? We're sponsored by Nexthink. They coined the term digital employee experience. I mean, how do you see that as becoming increasingly significant to technology leaders?
Well, it's crucial. And I am a firm believer that, again, it's taking this inclusive view of what you need, the workforce that you need to manage the problems of the future, and frankly, accommodating some interesting things in this space. So, for me, it could be as tangible as I have employees that really, they are night owls. They need to work at night. I have to enable them to work the hours where they are most effective. At the same time, employees that just accommodating those preferences. So folks that really can't do neckties. You will never have to wear a necktie if you are working for me. And I think for more traditional organizations, right, that maybe are not thinking in this way, those individual accommodations, which frankly as a CIO cost you nothing, but can be a huge force multiplier for your workforce's happiness and effectiveness, giving them the tools and capabilities they need, even when that represents some risk, I think that's crucial.